Welcome to Lectionary Call-In for Tuesday, February 14th, 2023, where two laypersons, a pastor, and an academician gather for about 45 minutes each week to discuss the Gospel Lectionary for the coming Sunday. And this Sunday is February 19th of 2023. On Tuesdays, we call in from wherever we may be. Today at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time to participate. And for our friend Charles Willard in Minnesota, it's 5:30 a.m. Central. Thank you, Charles. Our team's working to be faithful to year A, and that puts us in the Gospel of Matthew. And in the past weeks, and wrapping up today, we've been using the letters identified in the lectionary to create understanding in the Gospel text. And we close that journey today with one reading from 1 Peter. We hope this discussion will provide areas of focus and reflection. Here's how we do it. We develop perspectives independently after the leadoff person shares some formative questions, and then in this virtual discussion room, we share, encourage, and challenge each other. And here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
Sarah Mickelson in Tampa.
Bill Hall, St. Petersburg, Florida.
Charles Willard in Minnesota.
And I'm Don Upton. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. Good to see all of you, my friends. And two readings today. And the first is Matthew 17, 1 through 9, the Gospel reading. I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them. And from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the Beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." And when the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up, do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. And they were coming down the mountain. Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." That's the Gospel reading. And now we're going to turn to 2 Peter 1, 16 through 21, and my friend Charles Willard is going to pick that up.
For we did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we have been eyewitnesses of his majesty. For he received honor and glory from God the Father when that voice was conveyed to him by the majestic glory, saying, "This is my Son, my beloved, with whom I am well pleased." We ourselves heard this voice come down from heaven while we were there with him on the holy mountain. So we have the prophetic message more fully confirmed. You will do well to be attentive to this as the lamp shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. First of all, you must understand this, that no prophecy of Scripture is a matter of doing one's own interpretation, because no prophecy ever came by human will, but men and women moved by the Holy Spirit spoke from God.
Thank you, Charles. And I tell you, I just love the morning star rising in someone's heart. It just jumped out at me as you were reading that. So that's the pair. And good news here, it wasn't hard putting them together because there's a reference to some of the gospel that we read. So we have 3 questions to work with today. And Sarah, heads up, first one's coming to you. We've spent a lot of our time in our podcast discussing the presence of Jesus and his mission on earth, healing, nourishment, acting as a servant. Those are tangible things. Here, the Lectionary Committee asked us to look at the good news through the lens of majesty. Looking at Matthew and the letters passage, what is, and I'll put in quotes, what is his majesty? Sarah?
Well, this is a really big question for me. It's almost as if our little puny human brains recognize or comprehend, might be the better word, Jesus revealed in his mysterious glory, fully illuminated, brilliant, numinous, pronounced by God, beloved. It's like when we stand in the full realization of that fact, when it intersects with our comprehension of that fact, that seems to me to be the majesty of Christ. And it's something it's more than just a recognition. It's a comprehension as well as a resonance of something that's truthful. There's something that's profoundly independent of time.
Thank you, Sarah. Bill Hull, Majesty, His Majesty.
I think, as is often true in Scripture, a statement is made without a follow-up, detailed, rational explanation. We're simply told this phrase, His Majesty. So I think we get some clues. It's from God. In verse 17, Christ received honor and glory from God the Father. And in verse 19, he says this majesty confirms the prophetic message. That's talking about the impact, not, again, defining it. And I think, in one sense, it's strange that we have leaped ahead to Matthew 17 as paired with the First Peter passage. But, and I will say more about this in a subsequent question response, I think it's significant that in this journey we now stand with Peter, James, and John, Moses, and Elijah, and Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. Moses and Elijah represent the Old Testament law and prophecy. They represent more than that, but at least Moses is the bringer of the tablets and the law, and Elijah a prophet in every sense of the word. And I think we stand with Jesus, the disciples, Moses, and Elijah in the light of Jesus' transfiguration, which is, for those who were there, a physical manifestation of His majesty. And since there's not a detailed definition, I can briefly report what it stirs in me. It reminds me that Jesus is the light of the world, and He guides us to be transfigured, transformed, seeing service, sacrifice, and even suffering as surrounded by and reflecting the majesty of God seen in Jesus Christ and shared with us also as disciples. We've talked much about how Jesus reverses human expectations. And this Jesus who stands in majesty on the Mount of Transfiguration is going to suffer, die, be crucified before the resurrection. So majesty then takes on a whole different perspective. And I believe that for those there, Peter is caught up in awe and wants to memorialize it, that God's majesty is experiential, it's shared, it's empowering, and it is communal. Jesus wasn't alone on that mountain. And I think the First Peter and Matthew passages invite us to go beyond an enslavement to rationality, to go up on the mountain into a new world. In that regard, I want to read a few sentences from Father Richard Rohr this morning. There's an email that comes every morning. I will read this part of it. Prophets do not try to be logical. Perhaps this is why prophets get closer to the divine reality than many of the more rational and prudent logical and theological approaches to God. If we are looking for prudence and balance, we do not need to read the prophets. That is not their vocation. They are not called to be that. In a world that is so one-sided, always looking for the self-preserving, careful, cautious, and protective way, the prophet feels that he must stand way over at a distance and pull humanity to the other side. They must help humanity experience the pathos of God, the pain, the feeling, the longing, the desire of God. Thanks for the question, Don.
Thank you for that reading, Bill. Charles, His Majesty. What are your thoughts?
I don't have thoughts to share right now. I mean, it's been a long journey for me in this podcast, and these are just not my feelings. These are not my experiences, and I'm grateful for y'all's willingness to put up with not a naysayer, but a puzzle involver.
I think that's why you're here, and thank you, Charles. I just made a few notes. The first one is, if you're moderating or facilitating a class around this, one thing that might be interesting to start, and I would raise this, I raised it in my own heart, do I use the word or similar terms to majesty? Is it in my lexicon? I might ask you folks, do you use the word majesty, or what some of the other language that goes with it in translation would be grandeur, splendor, sovereign authority? I don't use any of it. I mean, I just kind of look around. Sarah, do you use that language? Do you use that?
Well, I recently was informed by my daughter that the word lit might describe something really awesome. And I thought that was interesting because we have this illumination image of Christ, and interesting intersection with modern language to call it lit. I'm not sure if that's still a cool vernacular. Since I'm not in the cool group, I'm a lame mom. So there it is.
Thank you. Bill, is that in your lexicon?
No, it's not. And I was thinking of that as you were speaking. What I would say, back to the experiential, I experience it when I stand at dawn out here on Tampa Bay at sunrise, or in my backpacking days at dawn on an overlook. All I can see is the forest. There is an experience of it. But no, I really don't use that language, Don.
Yeah, how about you, Charles? Do you use that language? Is that in your lexicon?
No.
Your everyday?
Well, not. It's not in my everyday lexicon. I mean, it's in my, dictionary, so that I know what the word. I can find out what it means and what it says, but I'm not talking about experience.
Okay. And not with mine either. I don't use it. I mean, the only time it would pop in my head probably is with irony. Yes, Your Majesty. Maybe with my children when I had young children. Oh, well, princess for a day, or, whatever you say. But it's not there. I don't use the word grandeur either. I don't use the word splendor, and I don't use the word sovereign authority. But I think that's the way to get a discussion going about what it means. And I think the breakthroughs like what you did, Sarah, that was like, wow, that made sense, the lit idea.
I will qualify, though, that I seek that experience daily. I will tell you, Venus has been spectacular. Just as the sun has set in the last week and a half, she's been hanging just above the horizon with Jupiter trailing so closely behind, and she has been spectacular or glorious in the heavens. So I think that that's one of those moments where we can all step back and go, yeah, we agree. That's an expression of that. So I don't actually use the words majesty, sovereign, but I'm going to try to do it today. I'm going to surprise somebody. That's spectacularly sovereign, majesty, something.
Well, as I was working through that, why I don't use it or what is used, put right here in front of us in this passage, and I just had four little parts. The first is I'm reading into this a message that it can be witnessed, can be. That there's, we don't spend a lot of time in the Old Testament, but you don't look on the face of God. You don't look at eternity, and you do not have access. We cannot bear the majesty. We're not allowed to see it. But here it says, it is not only accessible, it is witnessed. This is not hearsay. Peter's going, I was there. I'm here to tell you. I heard a voice. I saw the shining. It's all there. It can be witnessed. The second is, it can be witnessed without speculation. And the second question will go into that as well. It can be witnessed without speculation. It is what it is, or the I am is there. You don't have to create myths around it. So it can be witnessed without speculation from the eternal, third, and finally coming toward us. So it can be witnessed without speculation from the eternal coming toward us. And here it's all tied together, I think, with the gospel and the reading from First Peter. Peter is a voice from heaven. We will witness the coming of Jesus, following Jesus. It was there. And then those things in combination on the mountain. Well, let's get to the next question. Bill Hull, this one's coming at you. And I was wondering, we've been all through Epiphany, working mostly with Matthew and 1 Corinthians. And considering the insights that you all shared on the first question, I wonder, how did these passages depart from the messages of Matthew and 1 Corinthians of recent weeks, or the readings of Matthew thus far? How are they departing from the reading, and how are they additive? Bill Hull?
Very challenging question, Don. I went back over the preceding weeks, and just briefly, I will highlight from what we read from 1 Corinthians and the Gospel of John, and mostly Matthew. This journey in 1 Corinthians, Paul was reminding that we have all the spiritual gifts we need. He appeals to us to be of one mind. He challenges the foolishness of the wisdom of the world in contrast with the wisdom of God. And he calls for followers of Christ to avoid the party spirit. My spiritual leader is better than yours, Apollos, Paul, or Jesus. And then he talks about being infants who need milk, not yet ready for the solid food, and urges us to avoid jealousy and quarreling. And in the gospel journey, we were introduced again to John the Baptist and the emphasis on seeing and looking. Jesus, after John's arrest, withdrew, and then the Beatitudes the last 3 weeks, and we'll get to the passage for today in a moment. I think that the difference is that, as you put it, Don, earlier, we're dealing with tangible things, human conflict, human relationships, and literally in the passage for today, we're on another plane. But I think, as I've already suggested with question one, I think that the sequence the lectionary people offered us is so powerful. Now we're at a mountaintop. We're looking with a different perspective. And to illustrate that, again, I want to read a portion of a famous speech by Martin Luther King Jr. Interestingly, what I'm about to read, he had not prepared. He wasn't planning to speak. And he was in Memphis. And the next day, he was murdered. But he was pressed to speak at the church where he was. And he said this: "I do not know what will happen now, We have got some difficult days ahead, but it really does not matter with me now because I have been to the mountaintop, and I do not mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I am not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And God has allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I have looked over, and I have seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I am happy tonight. I am not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. That is a transfiguration. That is courage. That is sacrifice. What is additive to me is that in the commonplace struggle of human experience, that even among believers who get into conflict, Jesus still offers us the mountaintop. And from that perspective, we see the whole universe, the whole world, all creation, all human beings as loved by God. And so I think, Don, we need to keep going to the mountaintop, and we are transformed, and we see the world and ourselves differently. And I think we find the courage to take the first step down the mountain. You remember what was at the foot of the mountain of transfiguration. It's not in what we read. There was a young boy who needed healing. The disciples were in conflict because they'd not been able to heal, and Jesus came and brought a new wholeness. Those are my thoughts for the moment, Don.
Thank you, Sarah. We're talking about the last few weeks. We've been working on the letters and Matthew, and what in this adds to the discussion, or is a departure from what we've been dealing with the last few weeks?
It seems like we've stepped back from Paul's loving correction of the church of Corinth, and we're refocusing on the definition of who it is that we follow and why. The Transfiguration story presents us with a profound moment for believers, I think. Peter's eyewitness testimony lifts the person of Jesus beyond that of a prophet or a lawgiver or a law adjudicator. Jesus is beloved, faithful to his identity. He's acknowledged by the Father. And just as Jesus reveals the tenor and character of God, for our sake, the Father pronounces his affirmation and affection for Jesus. And I think that tells us more about the relationship we should have with each other. And it's interesting that it amplifies Paul's letter to the Corinthians in that way for me. It's almost like this is how you love each other.
Thank you. Charles, coming to you in a second. I was leaning towards departure on this one, and it went to the lexicon, that it's a reminder that if I don't use that language, I probably don't have my eyes open, right? I'm not aware that Majesty is present. And kind of going back to the 1 Corinthians, that he sets the stage for the advice and counsel he gives. You're very generous with, I think, Paul about about how he approaches it, but he sets it up by, he doesn't reference, I don't think, Majesty, but he says, look, it's already here. It arrived already. What are you doing? And I think the departure, I'm intuiting that these were linked together, these passages, as a reminder to me that if you pick departure, it's a rich departure. If I don't use the language, I'm not even engaged in the soaring parts of the letters in the gospel. I don't see them. I actually understand the healing. I I feel like I understand something of service. I understand something of the mission of Christ, but without the magisterial piece, it's not there. And so I think it's intentionally separating them. I think it's a departure to say, all right, let's set all that aside and focus on the majesty of the Christ and the Creator. And then we have real truth-telling. You know, we're a witness to these things. We're not making it out. And it's already arrived. And I just keep coming back to me not using that term, majesty. One of my favorite pop songs has the word, "There is no language in our lungs to tell the world how we feel." Don't you have the words? Well, I think this is saying, all right, let's just focus on the true majesty they're already present with us. That might help. That might help us scolding Paul. That might help us read the gospel going forward. By the way, XTC wrote that song. There's no language in our lungs to tell the world how we feel. And I think, here's a gift of the word where we have Peter going, well, I'll give you the language. It is majesty. Try it sometime. It might open your eyes if you use the words properly. So let's go to Charles. Any thoughts on whether this is additive or a departure from the readings we've been doing the past few weeks?
No, I'm still in the midst of misery. Misery. Well, a little of both.
Okay. Sarah, last question. What application does the concept of, I'm using the New Revised Standard Versions, cleverly devised myths have for today's readings and our encounter with Scripture going forward? The NIV calls it cleverly devised stories, but let's go with cleverly devised myths. Like your thoughts on that, Sarah.
Well, when you spoke it just now, my brain heard Carol Kane, and Billy Crystal having a conversation about they have a pronunciation issue with the word miss, and they say the word myth. And myth, yes? And so it's that combination of those two working together in a comedic way. For me, the cleverly devised myths seem to be centered down on human constructs, and that we've used those particular stories to reinforce a human desire or human framework of understanding a particular thing. So when I was very young, I probably had a stomach bug, but my mom fed me my favorite lunch, and from that day forward, when it didn't stay in my stomach, so I was unhappy most of the afternoon. But from that day forward, I had constructed a myth that particular lunch made me sick. So even to this day, I don't eat that lunch anymore. That's a human, cleverly devised myth in my book. So I'm thinking about the way that culture looks at Christianity. And they want to call it a cleverly devised myth, a common understanding of the creation story, and that we've rationalized the creation of a deity in an effort to help us reconcile and understand the world in which we live. And I think that that's been a projection for a lot of cultures to look at a faith practice in that explanation goes with it. So I think this is a challenge, an almost daily question that every believer poses to themselves about what is believed and why. And are we following a clever myth contrived by humanity, or do we have a relationship with a creator that's built on eyewitness accounts, glory, majesty, awe, splendor, and meaningful interactions with other Christ followers? And so that's, I think, something that we think about, we consider, that we visit, that we walk through as we continue to follow Christ. And I think that's an important conversation to have with yourself. And it may be a conversation that we're asked to have with someone else who's a believer. And it's a question of, why do you believe? What do you believe? And how is that relevant in the world in which we operate and the world in which we follow Christ? I think that's the delivery or the juxtaposition of a cleverly devised myth in confrontation with the truth of Christ.
Thank you. Charles, any thoughts on the application of the use of the term cleverly devised myths?
Nope.
Bill, I was thinking about this and how it connects with our readings of the past few weeks. And especially going into 1 Corinthians, there's when Paul's appealing to everybody, he's talking about for the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing. He talks about, he uses the word foolishness. And I think during some of our podcasts in recent weeks, it's been, to your point, Sarah, a matter of the heart, an examination of confronting the idea of folly. And I will add mythology, myth-making, what's really, God shows what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. And I think we've been having this discussion. I think there's nothing in this, and I think I've heard it before, there's nothing in here that's prohibiting myth-making in terms of human context. Your point, Sarah. The point, if I read it properly, is not this, that all understanding comes from the Christ, and that it is locked in, and it is knowable and witnessable. But it's not a mandate about creating understanding, human understanding, and the stories of Christ, through myth-making and storytelling. We are all storytellers. We're built to tell stories. We're built for context. So I thought that was helpful. And in the past few weeks, we've dealt with the concept of foolishness, and I'll just additively say, Sarah, that to what you said, that every passage we've read through Epiphany in this journey, in my heart, has been the encouragement to confront, not storytelling, but to confront doubt, to confront what may be foolish in my heart, or what other people are telling me is foolish. It seems to be where Paul is starting in Corinthians. I know you're confronting those things every day, but you've already arrived. I know you may have doubts. I know. And in this passage, as we wrap up this journey through Epiphany and Transfiguration Sunday, says, and by the way, add majesty to it. Bill, what do you think about the cleverly devised myths thing?
I want to build on a part of what I hear you and Sarah emphasizing. Sarah, your phrase was, these are human constructs. And that's true and a helpful reminder. And Don, you're saying that we do build myths. My memory from college and seminary was that myths may contain an element of truth. Mm-hmm. Myth doesn't mean there's no reality to it. An analogy in the theological world, a heresy is not the belief of a person who has no faith at all. Heresy means overemphasizing a truth of the gospel for us as Christians. For example, Christ was God, and Docetism said he was only God. It denied Christ's humanity. Other heresies, or what was declared heresy, said he was a good prophet, a good person, but he was not divine. So there's an element of truth that gets exaggerated. And I think that's the value and the potential risk of myth-making, Sarah, your human constructs. I think it's empowering, and I would say, I'm saying this because we have people listening who are perhaps preparing to preach or to teach this passage. I think it's empowering because if we knew the exact nature of it, we could say, well, I don't adhere to that myth. I take, Don, and what your question did for me, what myths do I construct? Mm-hmm. What truth am I over-exaggerating? I think that's empowering, that we have to find out for ourselves what are Bill's cleverly devised myths. And I like that phrase, cleverly, in that in other words, it makes sense to me. I'm creating this myth to protect myself, to exalt myself, or whatever, and it really sounds clever. It's really good. I like it. Now, we can surmise from other passages what some of the cleverly devised myths were. I've already referred to the personality cults. My spiritual leaders better than yours. Gnosticism, which said there's a secret knowledge and some people are higher up the spiritual ladder than others. Perhaps he had that in mind. But again, I think it's important that we examine ourselves, our culture, our relationships to explore what myths we devise. Some, for me, great examples, the health and wealth gospel. If you really are a person of faith, you will be healthy and wealthy. Christian white supremacy, using religion for political dominance. The belief that if someone advances our agenda, their unethical and immoral choices and behaviors are excused, lying is excused. Those are obvious examples. The problem with that is that I can say, well, I don't do that. I don't devise that myth. And I will be honest with you, Don. I'm not sure what my myths are, but I believe they are there. And I am going to end in a moment because if I could be aware of one, I'd be willing to share it. But I know I need to keep working on what are Bill's cleverly devised myths.
That's
Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. I'm probably going to be thinking about that all day. And also you have to be thinking about, my internal audience, how I interpret the world and how there's a lot of how you dress up in the New Testament, what clothes are you wearing, and, how am I dressing myself up? And since Jesus is a man, get myself and to dress him up any way I want to. It kind of goes into my internal audience. Who is my Christ? And I think that's where the concept of the prophets come into the readings today, which is that's different. The prophets have a direct take, a firsthand reading on the situation. It's not in play. It's not, the world is not in jeopardy. Christ rides through the gate in Jerusalem. He's riding to the cross. And at least as I understand it, nothing's going to stop him. Not my interpretation, not my selfishness, not any bickering, not any of my own mythology, which I need to figure out too, Bill. Nothing's going to stop him. Well, we're about out of time here. Before we say goodbye, just look around and see if there's any other follow-ups from anybody. We good? Outstanding. It's been a great walk through Epiphany and into Transfiguration Sunday. A reminder, we're going to begin Lent next time we're together. We'll be in the Lent season. And for more information, you can go to 3501 West San Jose with a physical location of Palma Ceia Presbyterian Church. That's in Tampa, Florida. But also on a virtual platform, you can go to palmaceia.org. That's PALMACEIA.org. We commend that site to you, not just because they're the ones that make this podcast possible, but because they're great sermons, readings, classes, chance to take communion, outstanding music, prayer. So check that out, and you're always welcome, and we'll see you next time.